club, which is known as the ABC, organized a very important seminar. And as I stand here today, perhaps this session would bring an end to this seminar, which highlights Christ's method of doing business. And for this, I would like to thank a number of people, a number of groups that have been instrumental in organizing this seminar. First of all, the AIIAS administration for being very supportive, the AIIAS business professors who have been mentors for this seminar, the ABC officers who have been the main organizers, beginning with Christina, Edivaldo, Lovely, Emmanuel, and Natasha. You have done a great job bringing people together and taking the word across that by adopting Christ's method of business, we would serve the world in a manner that is more befitting of a Christian. We'd also like to thank the secretaries, Kathy especially, and individuals such as Bruce, Mac, Arnold, Miguel, Militon, Trophy, and our pianist, Laura Sumandap. Thank you very much. And also the Bona Flower Shop for the beautiful flowers that you see here today. The topic for this session is stewardship. It is a topic that has captured my interest and attention for quite some time now. And it is primarily because stewardship is perhaps at the heart of what we do and why we exist. Stewardship is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in the Bible. And I'm saying this with some sense of responsibility. The usual focus when we talk of stewardship is on tithing. That's the usual focus. But today, I want you to shift this focus on managing God's gifts to us. And this shift in focus, I believe, is needed not just for today, but also for years to come. Technology sometimes fails us.
Check. Mike.
So I was talking to you about this much needed shift in focus from tithing to managing. Today, I would like to propose a new stewardship mantra. And this is to invest prudently, to manage effectively, and to return faithfully. When we begin to shift our focus from tithing and from giving to managing, I think we would see that it becomes very important for us to invest prudently, to manage effectively, and to return faithfully. To begin, I think it would be appropriate if we begin with a steward's prayer. And at this time, I would want you to repeat this steward's prayer after me. Dear Lord, I pray that you give me the wisdom to accept the responsibility of stewardship. Help me to understand that everything that I have is a gift from you. Create in me a desire to invest prudently, to manage effectively, and to return faithfully. I pray, Lord, that at the end of my life, you will welcome me into your kingdom, saying, well done, my faithful steward. This morning, I want to begin with a story that Jesus told, found in the book of Matthew 25:14-30. It is a story, a great story. Let me I can't see. How do I play? No.
There once was a wealthy and successful businessman who was planning to take a long holiday from work. He called his workers into his office so he could hand over the business to them while he was away. He had looked at each of their track records, and based on how well they worked, he gave them each some gold to look after. He gave one of his workers 5 big bags of gold. To another, he gave 2 bags. And to the third, he gave 1 bag. The first worker thought to himself, "You've got to spend money to make money." And straight away, he took his boss's money and invested it in the stock market, buying and selling and selling and buying, and before long, he had doubled what he had been given. The second worker did the same thing. He took his boss's money and invested it in the stock market, buying and selling and selling and buying, and before long, he had doubled what he had been given too. The worker who was given 1 bag of gold had a different plan. He dug a big hole and buried his boss's money.
I'm really sorry. I think we need to stop it and play that again. Can you stop? embedded here. Yes. Okay, this is the one. Yeah. So where is the plate? Oh, that. Okay. I don't want a split view. I want a single view. Yeah.
There were
Okay. Okay. But it's not showing. Okay, no problem. Yeah, it is not showing. I'm extremely sorry. We will play the video from here. Okay.
There once was a wealthy and successful businessman who was There once was a wealthy and successful businessman who was planning to take a long holiday from work. He called his workers into his office so he could hand over the business to them while he was away. He looked at each of their track records, and based on how well they worked, he gave them each some gold to look after. He gave one of his workers 5 big bags of gold. To another, he gave 2 bags. And to the third, he gave 1 bag. The first worker thought to himself, "You've got to spend money to make money." And straight away, he took his boss's money and invested it in the stock market, buying and selling and selling and buying, and before long, he had doubled what he had been given. The second worker did the same thing. He took his boss's money and invested it in the stock market, buying and selling and selling and buying, and before long, he had doubled what he had been given too. The worker who was given 1 bag of gold had a different plan. After a long time, the boss came back from holiday with his Hawaiian shirt and a cracking tan. He called them to his office to see how they had got on while he had been away. The first worker went to the office and said,
Boss, you gave me 5 bags of gold, and I've managed to double it. You now have 10 bags of gold. Great job. You deserve a promotion. I'm putting you in charge of international distribution. Boss, you gave me 2 bags. I doubled it. 4 bags of gold for you.
Once again, the boss was pleased and replied,
Great job. You deserve a promotion. I'm putting you in charge of UK distribution.
Finally, the third worker went into the office.
Boss, you gave me 1 bag of gold. And no offense, but I knew you were a bit of a slave driver and that. So I was like, you know, you're a little bit Lord Sugar, wrong side of the bed kind of guy. And I was like, let's face it, you're pretty scary. So I thought, what should I do with my 1 bag of gold? And then it hit me. I should dig a big hole, put the bag of gold in there, and then put the soil on top of it and wait for you to get back. Huh? Good idea, right? So there you go, 1 bag of gold. You can count it if you like, it's all there.
His boss was furious.
You lazy dog, you absolute waste of space. You thought I was a little bit Lord Sugar, did you? Well, if that's the case, why didn't you at least put it in the bank to build up interest? You know what you get with nothing? Nothing. Take his bag and give it to the worker who has 10 bags. Oh, do you know what? I haven't got time for this. I don't even want to look at you anymore. Get out of my sight. You're fired.
Here was the story of the bag of gold, the parable of the talents with a modern day setting. And at this time, I want you to have a closer look at this parable of the talent. I want you to refer to the notes that I have given you. I think some of you have this, right? I do not know if we have enough to go around. All right, there we have it on the screen. The parable of the bag of gold. And as we are going through this parable, I want you to focus on certain things that I would like to point out. The first is, the story begins with the master, a man who is going on a journey, a long journey. And he calls his servants. Now remember, these servants can be considered as the stewards because they were called and they were entrusted. I want you to kind of focus on the word entrusted. What does it mean to entrust something with something? The word entrust is kind of powerful. It is a statement of trust when you are able to give perhaps some resources, a portion of your wealth for investment or for caretaking. And going further, the story says that the master gave to one 5 bags of gold, and to another 2, and to another 1. And I want you to next anchor on this phrase, each according to his or her ability. Now, the master here allocates resources according to the steward's ability and merit. And then the master, as the story says, goes on a long journey. And so, what did the first steward do who had received 5 bags of gold? The story says that he immediately puts this to work, puts the money to work. In other words, what the master does here is what the steward does here is he invests this money. And as the story progresses, we hear that the good steward with the 5 bags of gold gains 5 bags more. And then the story goes on with the one who received 2 bags of gold. He gained 2 more. But the man who received just 1, what did he do? He dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. The money was safe, but it was idle. It was an idle resource. And then the story progresses and says, after a long time, the master returned. And then he called his servants, the stewards. And he asks each of them to give an account. And the man who received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. And he said, Master, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold, and see that I have gained 5 more. And his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things, and I will put you in charge of many things. You know, the faithful servant here is being given a promotion and is giving a position of higher authority. And he's being put in charge of many more things that he was earlier. He is being rewarded for his performance. And then there is an invitation. It says, come and share your master's happiness. And a similar thing happens to the second steward, who had again 2 bags of gold. And he invests them and he gains 2 more. But I want you to focus on the last person, the man who received just 1 bag of gold. He comes and he says, Master, I knew that you were a hard man. Now, this servant, this steward, who had received just 1 bag of gold, makes a negative presupposition. And he says, Master, you're a hard man. You are known for harvesting where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid. Now I want you to focus again on the word that, or a phrase that the steward with only 1 talent makes. He says, so I was afraid. He was too timid, too conservative to invest, thinking that he might lose what he already had received from the master. And so what does the bad steward do? He makes a fatal mistake. And his mistake is keeping the master's money safe and not investing. Evidently, it is apparent that this steward did not understand the time value of money. He did not understand the time. If you keep your possessions with you for a long and extended period of time, in due course of time, it loses value. And when it loses value, actually, the master is losing. What was the response of the master? The master calls him and he says, hey, you wicked and lazy servant. Now that is the condemnation that the bad steward receives. Now, when you look at this story, it may seem that the steward who received only 1 bag of gold did not actually lose any money. It may seem. But the master calls him wicked, and the master calls him lazy, because the resources that were entrusted to the last servant, the one who received just 1 bag of gold, did not invest him. And then the condemnation that is found in verse 30, the master says, throw the worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. A punishment which is very, very severe for keeping resources that are idle. Now, the story of the parable of talent does not stop here. There are many people who would kind of end the story here, but the subsequent verses perhaps are more profound, and today I would like you to focus on the subsequent verses of the parable of the bag of gold. Here, on verse 31, it begins with the words, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all his angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne, and he will judge. He will judge all nations before him, and he would separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will keep the sheep on his right and the goats on the left. And then the king will say to those who are on the right, the good stewards, come, you are blessed of my Father. Take your inheritance." Now, I want you to understand that the two stewards who invested the money that they had received from their master, they receive this invitation. And the word "come" underscores this invitation. And then I would want you to focus on the next word, which is very important. It says, take. Take your inheritance. Here, the servant, it seems, is no more a steward. A servant is invited to take his inheritance and is being invited to be part owners. And then in the next verse, in verse 37, you would read that the righteous will turn to him and say, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? When did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you?" And then the king would reply and say, "Truly, I tell you, whenever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me." Here, I want to point out a great lesson that the subsequent verses from the parable of the bag of gold tells us. That when we create a surplus, when we invest resources that God has given us, we need to channel those resources and surplus to feed the hungry, to give drink to those who are thirsty, to invite the strangers in, to clothe the naked, and to look after the sick, and to visit those who are imprisoned. Resources generated from our investments need to go to do the services that God calls us to do. Now, I would invite you to look at some principles that the story of the parable of the gold or bag of gold brings to us. And this leads us to the first principle that the parable of the talent or the parable of the bag of gold tells us. And the first principle that we are led to is the stewardship principle. The first stewardship principle is that God is the creator owner and man is the creature steward. This is the first principle in stewardship that we glean from this parable of the bag of gold. God is the creator owner, and we are the creature steward. Now, looking into the Bible, in Psalms 24:1, we read that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. And so the earth is the Lord's and everything in it is the Lord's. God is a creator owner not only of this earth, but we believe that He is the owner because He has created the entire universe. I want to believe that stewardship is a relationship between the creator owner and the creature steward. And here, this is the relationship God owns and man manages. Now, the concept of ownership has always been something which needs to be understood deeply. Ownership is often defined as a plenary control over an object. Now, when you say, I own this laptop, it means that I have certain claims and powers and privileges. I have the right to possess it. I have the right to use it. I have the right to manage it. And I have the right to use it as a capital to generate further wealth. And if there is an income that accrues out of this laptop, it also is mine. And should I want to dispose it, throw it in the garbage or give it to somebody, I can dispose it the way I please. And so, stewardship is a right which comprises of certain powers, claims, and privileges. Now, let me ask you this question. Is possession de facto ownership? Just because I possess this laptop, or you possess a piece of land, or you possess an asset, does that really mean that it belongs to you? You have a monopoly of rights over it? Well, I will leave that question to you for you to answer in private. Now, that brings us to another question, perhaps a very fundamental question. How does ownership arise? You know, I come from India, and the ancient Hindu jurists, thousands of years ago, mentioned 7 modes of acquisition of ownership. How do we, as individuals, become owners? The 7 sources of ownership kind of still remains today, even in current literature. We have not really added very much to these. The first is through inheritance. What you have, perhaps you have inherited it. Or you can also own because you have made a gain somewhere. Or you have purchased something and so you would want to claim ownership over it. Or you have grabbed it from somebody else. You've made a conquest and snatched it from somewhere. And you say, well, this is mine, it belongs to me now. Or you have made an investment and you have gotten certain returns. And then that becomes, again, something that becomes a source of ownership. Employment is another, or you could have got some gifts. Now, looking at these 7 sources of ownership, you know, I'm kind of amazed that creation is not there. as one of the sources of ownership. You know why? It is because man is not capable of creating. Man can inherit, purchase, snatch it from somebody else, or accept a gift from somebody else, or make an investment and make a gain from an investment. But man cannot create. And so, who is a creator? A creator. Who's the owner? Who's the true owner? A true owner is only the one who can create. And today, I would like to propose that creatorship, it is only creatorship that gives rise to primordial or the original ownership. So true ownership can come only if you are able to create. On the other hand, we can have what I often term as pseudo-ownership. We can have a claim of ownership over something, but it is pseudo-ownership. And how does this claim actually arise? Looking at literature, we find that when labor enters into an object, the object becomes the property of a person, or it gives certain rights. For example, I have a piece of wood, and I fashion it into a table like this. My labor is entering into this table, and it goes and merges with this table, and therefore, I have a claim over this table. I have certain claims. And so, when labor enters into an object, we tend to claim ownership over it. But, in my opinion, this is pseudo-ownership. In the parable, and in the story, the short video that we saw, let me ask you this question. Who is the owner? The master, right? And who is the steward? The worker. Now, it is imperative that we understand what is a stewardship situation. Because unless we understand the stewardship situation, we will not be able to understand the concept behind stewardship. Very often what happens is, those who own do not manage what they own. You get me? The owners do not manage what they own. On the other hand, we have managers who do not own what they manage. And so we have owners who do not manage what they own, and managers who do not own what they manage. And this creates, in business, what is known as the agency problem. Because businesses and organizations are seldom managed by owners themselves. So what do? They hire a manager. And these hired managers often act to pursue their own interests. So they don't really work toward the interest of the owner themselves. But they tend to put their own interest before that of an owner. And so, businesses have created certain solutions to this problem of ownership, agency. And the first set of solution is based on many mechanisms that we have, mechanisms of governance, such as oversight, monitoring, auditing, control structures. These are used to get the steward to protect the interests of the owner. Then there is another set of things that can be done to address the problem of agency. And that is, if we build values, we can, and perhaps ethics and social norms, we may be able to get the agents to behave in a way that protects the interests of the owners. And so we have created, in literature we find that we come across a theory which is known as the stewardship theory. And the stewardship theory simply states that managers, certain managers, when they are left alone, will act in a responsible way. Stewards are people who would protect the interests of the owners and will not, in some way or the other, jeopardize the interest of the owners. Now, we go to the principle number 2. And the principle number 2 is that each of us are given a bag of gold. From the story, from the parable of the bag of gold, we learn that each of us are given a bag of gold. There is nobody without a bag. Some may be given 5, others may be given 1, but each of us are given a bag of gold according to our ability. But the more bags we have, I want you to remember, with more bags comes greater responsibility. In our disposal, we have what is known as factors of production. And in economics, we study that we have land, labor, capital, technology as factors of production. We also have resources at our disposal. And what is a resource? I would like to submit to you this morning that anything that we can make use of is a resource. Anything. Can you think of what can make a resource valuable? If you ponder a little, you'll realize that scarcity actually enhances the value of a resource. Or if a resource is inimitable, cannot be imitated easily, it is more valuable than the others. And if a resource can satisfy a human need, then it becomes more valuable. So how do we use the resources that we have on our hand? We need to use resources effectively, efficiently, and economically. Well, I could dwell on these in detail, but let's move forward to the stewardship principle number 3. The stewardship principle number 3 is resources must be put to use, must be put to good use. And how do we do that? We do that by investing the resources that we have at our disposal. I want you to go back and recall the parable or the story of the bag of gold that we just read. Each of the stewards are expected to invest. How do we invest? Now, this is a question that we need to answer. We need to invest wisely. We need to weigh the risks and the gains. An unwise investment is where we do not weigh the risks and we jump headlong and perhaps make an investment only to lose and only to realize that we have made a poor investment decisions. Now, in investing, I want you to understand that as good stewards, we need to think portfolio. Now, what does the term portfolio mean? Portfolio refers to any combination of financial assets, such as bonds, stocks, cash. We should invest in a wide variety of things and not in just one project. Why? Because putting all of your eggs in your one basket could be dangerous. You may lose everything should one of the businesses that you have invested everything in collapses and sinks. And here you'd find asset allocation of the super rich the Americans that super rich Americans I got from one of the financial magazines, and you would see that a lot of resources are being used in hedge funds. Now, hedge funds are, you can ask Mr. Leroy and Dr. Nazushian about these. These are high-risk areas, but with high returns. Now, I want to submit to you this morning that an idle resource is a sin. A resource that is sitting somewhere is a sin. You know, as I mentioned right in the beginning of my talk, that I will not be dwelling very much on tithing. But, you know, keeping a resource idle is worse than not giving your tithe. Yes, because if you don't give a tithe, at least, but if you put resource to good use, at least that resource is being used by people in the community. I want to submit that we rob God by keeping our resources idle. We cheat God by underutilization of resources. And lastly, we trick God by poor allocation of resources. You know, resources have alternative uses. Economics tells us alternative uses. Now, how do we use our resources, either for this or that, becomes important. A good economic tool is a production possibility frontier. You know, I want you to see, given a set of resources that we have, we can make pizzas or cokes. If we don't make any pizzas, we can make, let's say, 15 cokes. And if we make one pizza, we are using part of the resources, and so we would make less of another commodity, which is coke. And down the line, we have different combinations here. And I want you to look at the production possibility frontier graph. Now, this represents here an optimal use of resources. Outside of this curve, production is not possible because we don't have the resources. We cannot make 16 or 20, let's say, coke, because the resources are not there. But I want you to look at point Z here. This is attainable. But at point Z, is it making appropriate use of the resources that we have? We have 5 coke and how many pizzas here? 3. But making just 5 coke and 3 pizzas would keep certain resources ideal. And by doing so, we are actually robbing God. So, we move on to stewardship principle 4. We need to achieve more with less. God considers waste as an abomination. And therefore, optimization is the key. We need to learn how to eliminate activities that fail to add values. There are 7 wastes that literature tells us that we need to avoid. One is overproduction, waiting, unnecessary transportation, overprocessing, inventory, unnecessary motions, and defective parts. These are some of the wastes that we need to cut and eliminate. The 5th principle of stewardship that is also found in the story that we just read. We need to show results and produce outcomes. When the master calls us, we cannot show him a grand plan and say, this is what I want to do. This is what we plan. This is a grand vision. He wants to see results. And that is why when you see the parable, if you read the parable, you find that in the parable, each of the servants, the good servants, say, see, I have gained 5 more. That is verse 20. And verse 21, the verse 22, the second steward also says, see, I have gained 2 more. You know, you need to show results. And how do we show results? You know, in business, there is something known as the triple bottom line. We are not only concerned with profits, but also with people and planet. And we need to have a balanced perspective when we show results. We need to show a concern for profit, but the concern for profit should also be matched by a healthy concern for people and for the planet. Now, I want to propose that God also has a bottom line, but it's a different kind of a bottom line. I want you to read what the passage that is found in the text and in the story that we just shared with you. God says, for I was hungry and you gave me food, thirsty, stranger, naked, sick, I was in prison. Now all of these are talking about, is it talking about profit or is it talking about people? It's talking about people. It's talking about people. While we may have a triple bottom line, you know, man's bottom line, profit, people, and planet, God has perhaps a single bottom line, and that is people. And the parable of the bag of gold goes a long way to explain that. We need to invest our resources, the resources that we have, and we need to create a surplus. There's no doubt about it. We need to create profits. But these profits need to be used for what purpose? Yeah, we need to feed the hungry, give drink to those who are thirsty, take in the strangers, clothe the naked, visit the sick, and also liberate those who are in the prison. The last stewardship principle is that we need to give account and take responsibility. Finally, when the master returns, we need to give account and we need to take responsibility if something goes wrong. In business, we often learn that if you have accepted a job assignment and if you have accepted the authority and you have also accepted the resources, then you are obligated to give an account. So, this morning, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the stewardship mantra again. You need to invest prudently, you need to manage efficiently, and you need to return faithfully. And when you have done this, there is a final reward that is waiting for you. And the final reward is in the form of an invitation that the master would say, come, you who are blessed of my Father, take inheritance. Take inheritance. Take your inheritance. The kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. I want you to anchor on the word come because it's an invitation. Take, it is your right. And so, in the final analysis, what happens? The servant is invited to take his inheritance. You know, the servant never inherits. Who inherits? It is the son who inherits, right? But here, the servant is being invited to take his inheritance. What a great thought. You know, it is only the heir who has the right of inheritance. But here, the master is inviting the servant to become part owners. And the great story of stewardship is this, that the servant is no more a steward. He becomes a part owner. And we move from the story of stewardship to the story of ownership. On the day of reckoning, on the day of great reckoning, may we all hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." God bless you.
Let's all stand and sing more of Jesus.